Hello, hello. Welcome to Portimao on the south coast of Portugal. This scenery is loaded in by Autoortho. It's a nice VFR day, nice and clear. Yeah, it looks pretty nice. Good place to fly. Now, in the middle of the screen is an airfield. And this is where we'll be flying from today. Now, strangely, my aircraft has disappeared. There it is. So, I'm going to give the Daher Kodiak 100 a bit of a break, and I'm going to switch back to to the Cessna, the 172. I'm a Cessna 150 pilot, and I need to get back into the groove of flying the Cessnas, rather than the constant speed propeller stuff. So I'm going to go through some checklists, and I'm going to do some circuits, and you're more than welcome to join me. So let's go through our checklists. First thing we do when we approach the aircraft, obviously make sure it's got two wings, engines attached, two wheels at the back, one at the front. Everything looks pretty good. Then we jump inside. First thing we do is look for the control locks. So when you store an aircraft overnight, or just when it's not in use, on this side, let's see if this is modelled. I don't think it will be. It's quite detailed. Yeah. So what you get is through the side of the control column, there's a little hole, and you can put a control lock through there, and it stops this from moving. That's because the controls in the Cessna are reversible. So if the wind catches your aileron out there, it can move the aileron around, which actually causes your control columns to move around. Oh, that's quite sensitive. I might need to mess around with the settings a little bit. So I'm going to make an excuse now that my takeoff will be bad because of the sensitivity of the controls. That seems really sensitive. Okay, we'll figure that out later. First things first, let's make sure that the control locks are out. There was, regrettably I don't remember his name, but there was a famous stunt pilot who had hundreds or thousands of hours, and there's a tragic video of him flying this plane, taking off. At takeoff, the nose of the plane just goes right up in the air. Obviously the aircraft stalls, wings over, and then crashes, and sadly he was killed. And it turned out that he didn't make that initial preliminary check of taking the control lock out. So having watched that video, it stays in my mind that you've got to make sure the control locks are out. It's something I'm very, very sensitive to and very strict on. Now that should never really happen. As you'll see as we go through the checklist, we do check the movement of these controls quite regularly as before takeoff. So we do the rudders, we do the ailerons, and we do the elevators as well. So there's no real excuse for not checking that you've got full movement of the controls. Next thing we check, I'm going to turn the yoke off just because it's easier to see around the cockpit. Next thing we check is that the magneto switches are off, which they are. Parking brake is on. Master switch, let's turn that on. And then the next few things is to check the operation of each of the lights. Now you wouldn't do it individually. What we generally do is we turn them all on, including the pitot heat. Not necessary really in Portugal. So we jump outside, we check to make sure we have a rotating beacon. Quite hard to see an X-plane during the day, but yes, we have got a rotating red beacon on the tail. On the left wing, we should have a red light and a flashing strobe light, which we do. That red light is actually lit. Again, hard to tell during the day. In Portimao, we've got a taxi light and a landing light in the wing. And on the other side, we should have a green light and a strobe, green light and a strobe. And what we'd also do as we walk around the aircraft is we would just touch or hang on to the pitot tube on the right here and just make sure that it's warming up in our hands. It doesn't have to be too hot. It does get hot if you leave it on for a while, but if you just turned it on in the cockpit, you can just hold it and you can just feel it getting warm, which means that if we do fly into potential icing conditions, you shouldn't really fly in icing, but any conditions where any moisture in the air where you don't want the pitot tube to ice up, you can just turn the pitot heater on and you know that it is working. So we'll just turn these back off again because it's just draining the battery. What's next? So master switch, rotating beacon, pitot heat, landing and nav lights, flaps. Okay, so before we turn off the master switches, we step outside. In the aircraft, it's easy just to do this from where you're sitting, but we just check that the flaps are operational. So down in stages, it's 10 degrees and it's symmetrical, 20 degrees and it's symmetrical, 30 degrees. And there is no 40 degrees in the 172, at least within X-plane. In the 150, it does go down to 40 degrees, and that means you can do very, very steep approaches without gaining speed. It's very handy for full flap arrivals. So flaps, we set full down, jump back into the aircraft. Obviously we wouldn't have left the aircraft in the real world. What's next? Radio nav, check that the radio nav's off. And fuel cock, we check that that is on. And at this point we turn off the master switches with the flaps down. The reason we do that is because the next thing we're going to do is jump outside and do an external check, which will include the flap fairings. So we would step outside, we check, first of all we check the landing leg, make sure it's not cracked, there's no damage to it. We check the fairing where it attaches to the fuselage. We then move down to the tyre, check it's undamaged, make sure it's inflated. And then there will also be some red marks on the wheel and on the tyre. They should line up, which means that there's no creep of the tyre. The brakes work on the wheel, not the tyre. So when you brake the wheel, you want the tyre to also stop or slow down. You don't just want to apply brakes to the wheel and then have the tyre rotating freely around the wheel. That isn't good. So creep marks, the red paint, usually tells us that it's going to work. Our brakes are going to work. We also check the hydraulic line, which normally runs down the strut to the wheel. That's the hydraulic brake fluid getting to the brake system. The brake itself should look undamaged. It should be clear, smooth, no damage to it, no pits, no holes or cracks or anything in it as well. And then we have a look at the wheel nut holding the wheel on. So the wheel nut is a single nut, like a Formula 1 car, and it will have a pin through it as well. That pin needs to be nice and secure too, and that just holds it all in place. Next thing we look at on the Cessna is the strut. So it's a strutted wing. So the way it attaches to the aircraft, it's actually, the wing doesn't go all the way through. In fact, when you're sitting in the aircraft, can I do this? Let's have a quick look. When you're sat in the aircraft, you can actually look up and see the shape of, so that's the front of the wing there. It's just kind of attached to the side here. On some of the aircraft I fly, you can actually see the bolts holding the wing on, which is a little bit disconcerting when you're first starting out, but you do get to trust the aircraft, especially when you start doing things like spins and high G maneuvers. It's a very, very strong aircraft. As far as I know, there's never been a wing failure of a Cessna strutted wing, apart from extremely badly maintained aircraft. So yeah, we check the strut, make sure it's all good, make sure it's nice and secured. We check, we then go underneath. Normally I bash my head off the flap, which is just sort of a tradition now. You check to make sure, can you see them? So yeah, you can just about make out these flap hinges. Just make sure those are nicely attached, there's no looseness, you don't have the inner flap track attached, but the outer one is loose, and the flap would then wobble around. Next we move along to the wingtip. Again, we just check to make sure that, so I'm just trying to play director here a little bit. Again, check to make sure that the aileron is properly attached. So along the aileron here, you have a lot of attachment points and just make sure there's no missing rivets or anything else. We'll move to the wingtip. This is usually a composite piece attached to the metal wing. So these do get damaged. These do show cracks and that sort of thing. It doesn't mean that it's not airworthy, but if the damage is troubling, then obviously just reject the aircraft and don't fly it. I have flown on a few aircraft with slight cracks, and maintenance has signed it off as being okay. So they're the experts. Trust your maintenance team. If it is significant, they are not going to allow you to fly an aircraft that they have signed off, because that's their maintenance license up in smoke if anything happens. We then move to the front, make sure that the leading edge is undamaged, there's no dent, nobody's driven this into a fuel truck, for example. Check the lights again aren't damaged, the cover is on, there's nothing that's going to impact the aerodynamics of the wing. Next thing we do is we get a step ladder. I normally do this afterwards just because it's easy to do a walk around, then do the checks. Get a step ladder, climb up onto the wing, and then have a look in the fuel tank. Make sure that the fuel that you can see, you also get a little stick that you can stick in. It basically indicates how many gallons is in that wing. Goes up to about 13 gallons on the 150. Probably larger in the 172. It's been a very long time since I flew the 172, and I wasn't really at the stage of flying where I knew the systems and knew the capacity of the fuel tank particularly well. You can actually see the front of the wing, the leading edge of the wing here, which I mentioned before, that you can see from inside the cockpit. So you'd open up the fuel cap here, have a look into the wing. It doesn't fill up the wing. There's actually a plastic. Excuse me, I'm going to have to cough. There's actually a large plastic container within the wing, so it's not like it's just going to slosh around inside the metal structure of the wing. It is within a plastic container in here. This is one of the reasons why I think it's going to be relatively straightforward. Not that I'm an aircraft mechanic. Just to swap those plastic fuel containers with, for example, a battery connected up to an electric engine, and then I think you can convert Cessnas reasonably easily to electric aircraft. But I'm sure it's a lot harder than I think it is. So once we've checked the fuel tank, are the drain ports modelled on this? Let's have a quick look. Gosh, that's a slow thing to do. I can't quite see them, but in the wing root there's normally a little tap, and you tap off some fuel. You have a look in it and just make sure there's no water in the fuel, because that would be bad. The engine doesn't work very well on water. Imagine if it did. Imagine if water was somehow also a fuel. That'd be amazing. So we then walk around the front of the aircraft. We'll check all of these rivets, or these screws, on the port cowling. We check the spinner, which is the front part of the propeller. We check the propeller, which this is modelled as a Macaulay prop, which I have on the aircraft I normally fly, which is quite cool. Again, check to make sure there's no damage, nobody's driven into something. We check the starboard cowling as well. Now this has got a little inspection port on the top. Mine's got a very large inspection flap on the side that you open up, and you get access to the dipstick for the oil and the battery, etc. So you just make sure everything looks fine in there, check the oil level, and all is good. When we're over on the starboard side, the right hand side of the aircraft, we have a VATSIM label over there. Looks so. We're in Portimao. We're not far away from Faro Airport. I expect that to be TAP Portugal 1 November Golf taking off from Faro. Might be able to see that in a moment. So when we're on the right hand side, we've checked the starboard cowling. We've done the fuel drain on both sides. We get our ladders, have a look at the fuel contents of the right hand wing, and again we just check the reverse of what we did before. check the leading edge, check the wingtip, check the aileron. Again, you can, if you push on the ailerons, you can actually move them up and down. You should be able to see the other aileron moving in the opposite direction. And also, you should be able to see, if you turn on the yokes, you should be able to see, when you push on the ailerons, you should be able to see the controls moving inside the cockpit. Again, we check the flaps, check the flap tracks, the hinges, and just the general condition of all the flight controls, make sure everything is looking good. On to the next page of my checklist. Like I say, we're doing the reverse of what we did before, so we then check the strut, the hydraulic lines, the wheel nut, inflation of the tyre, creep marks, etc. We then check the fuselage condition, so just make sure that everything's looking fine, undamaged, well, it's all attached. We move to the back of the aircraft, check the tailplane, again make sure it's all secure, there's no fractures, no cracks. We check the right hand side elevator, which is normally the one that has the trim tab on it. The trim tab is only on one side of the elevator, which I was surprised at, but yeah, it just keeps things simple. So the trim tab basically is like a little elevator, this bit here, and what this does is it moves the tab into the airflow, which causes, so if it lifts up, it would push the elevator down, and it just relieves some of the pressures on the flight controls. So you could push and pull on here and you would see the controls move in the cockpit. Generally, elevators have got a no push label on them. You're not supposed to push down on them to get to see the reversible controls effect from them. Again, we move to the left, make sure that the left tailplane is correct. We look at the rudder, make sure the rudder is attached, good condition. We make sure that the aerials at the back here are both present and correct. We check all the hinges, all the linkages, make sure everything is correctly attached. And then move down the port fuselage. We walk down the port fuselage here. Don't believe we have this storage. Well, we don't have the storage thing on the C-150, but because the 172 is much more of a it's a four-person aircraft. It's used for touring, so it does need a bit more storage space. So you can put stuff into the back of this, behind the seats here. So yeah, we just work our way down back to the side of the cockpit here. Again, we just check all the windows and just make sure everything's good. I'm going to have to cough again, apologies. And we're back. So, quickly walk through. So next we jump back into the aircraft. Now it's interesting at this point, because I'm normally doing these checks while my instructor is back in the clubhouse having a nice coffee. So I get to this point and then I would normally go back to the clubhouse and get my instructor to come to the aircraft. Alternatively, I would get the engine started and then they would know to come out. So first thing we're going to do is make sure the seat is adjusted and secured, make sure our seatbelt is on, make sure the door is closed. Check again that the parking brake is on. A few of the aircraft I've flown don't have parking brakes that are operational, so you just generally push down on the toe brakes, which also releases the parking brake on some aircraft. So we use our toe brakes as the parking brake. So going down this list, parking brake is on, radio and avionics are off, instruments are undamaged, legible, yes we can read them. Flying controls, full and free movement in the correct sense. So we normally do like a big square movement with the controls. Yep, that all looks good. Check the rudder as well. Fantastic. We're doing circuits. We're going to be doing a few takeoffs and landings, so the rudder will be very, very important. Trim, set neutral. So for some reason on this aircraft I can't use the trim doesn't come alive until the master switch is on. It's almost like it's got electronic trim. But now I can use my electric trim on my Cytec yoke to move the trim. But it's strange that it does require electricity when this is clearly a manual trim control. Trim should be neutral. Cabin heat should be set off. Cabin heat is over here, so that's off. Don't even think it's modelled really. No, it's not. Mixture, full and free movement. So we've got full and free movement over the mixture. And we're going to set that to rich, which is all the way forward. Throttle nut isn't modelled, but it's this ring here, which basically controls how much friction there is when you're moving the throttle control. That should be to be set loose at this stage. The throttle, full and free movement. What we're going to do is we're just going to set it to have a little bit of. It's just going to open the throttle just a little bit, so when we start the engine, the RPMs are going to rise above idle speed. Throttle, full and free movement. Carburetor heat is not modelled on here, but on the C150 you do have to check the carburetor heat and set it to cold. Check the magnetos are off, and at this point we turn the master switch on, which activates. Over here we have the Hobbs meter, and this is what we take a recording of. This is what we get charged on. We pay by the hour for the aircraft. So the master switch is on, which means the Hobbs is on. Circuit breakers, run your finger along these circuit breakers here, make sure nothing is popped out. Fuel cock is on, so it's always on an X-plane, but you can also choose to select the left or the right. Fuel tank, or both. This is just set to both. We're going to turn the beacon on. Beacon is on, so that's the tail, the flashy red light on the tail. Primer, again, is not modelled, but normally you can squirt a bit of fuel into the engine manually, and that just helps it start. We look around, make sure there's no one about to walk into the propeller area, and then normally I open the door and I shout, "Clear prop!" and then we start the engine. So we do that by turning the magnetos to both and then moving it to start, release it, and it stays in both. First thing we do is we get the engine to 1200 RPM, and that just keeps the aircraft nice and happy. I can't hear that, so I'm guessing you probably can't hear it very well either. Just turn this up a bit. We turned this down when we did the Daher Kodiak video, but that's got its own little audio control thing, so I'll modify it there. Okay, so the engine is on. That's the internal and starting checklist complete. After start we do what we call the ROSAMs, which is RPM to 1200, oil pressure rising to within the green within 30 seconds, so yeah, that's in the green. Starter warning light, I don't think it's modelled on here, but we can hear that the starter motor has disengaged. This is what it sounds like if it doesn't. So yeah, it's definitely disengaged. The ammeter down here is, it may not be charging, but at least it's showing 0, so the drain on the battery is negligible or 0. Suction, we've got a vacuum system here which is in the green as well. That operates our artificial horizon. The next thing is the magnetos. So go down to the magnetos. So the magnetos are basically the is basically the. So I'm just messing with the controls. Magnetos is basically the ignition systems. So it's got two, just like in your car, and they work like spark plugs, but they work slightly differently. They're a bit more reliable, and they don't rely on the battery. They're more of a mechanical system. So what you can do is from both ignition systems, we'll check the left one running by itself works. So we turn off the right, and you can see the RPMs will drop slightly because ignition will be slightly less efficient. So the RPMs have dropped. Now the maximum drop we would expect to see here is let me just double check. So magnetos check. So the first thing we do is check for dead cut. So we're not worried too much about the RPMs at this stage. Let's just make sure that both magneto systems are working. It's been a couple of months since I flew, so getting slightly rusty by these things. It's amazing how fast you actually lose the muscle memory for it. Next we check the flaps come up in stages. I'm going to jump outside. I hope this isn't too noisy. Nope, that's good. And just like we put them down in stages and check the symmetry, we also want to raise them in stages and just check the symmetry. Okay, so we have a clean wing. You can hear the stall warning horn squeaking. Magnetos, flaps up, instruments set as required. Because we're going to do circuits, I'm going to set our altitude to show 0. Now, because Portimao is a coastal town, that's probably not going to be a million miles away from the altitude, which is the height above sea level. But if you set it to 0 here, then when you're coming, you can use this for your circuit height rather than your altitude. So height is the distance between you and the ground. Altitude is the distance between you and mean sea level. So we're just going to use this, which is called QFE, which is height. What else have we got? So we need to check, so we'll just get rid of the parallax, make sure that we're reading off this correctly. So that's south, so that's 180, 190, 195, I'll call that 197. 195, 6, 7. So our DI, direction indicator, is now aligned to the compass. So the DI is a gyroscope based system. So that also uses the vacuum system to spin the gyros, and we just use that because the compass it takes ages to settle, and it's prone to underreading and overreading depending on whether you're turning north or south. So there's a mnemonic that we use, an acronym or an abbreviation that we use, which is UNOS, which is undershoot north, overshoot south. So when you're turning towards the north, you basically want to, at least in the northern hemisphere, you want to kind of steer less north than you think you would, and then the compass will catch up once you've leveled out. And it's the opposite to the south. You want to oversteer towards the south, and then the compass will catch up and will settle lower than the heading that you think you're on. But it's not a great way to fly. The DI, having a gyroscopic direction indicator, is much easier to fly on. Okay, let's go down. So we are next going to turn on the radio. I am flying with X-Pilot, which I can turn on. I'm still learning this. There we go. So X-Pilot is on. There's nobody tuned in right now, and we are on 122.8, which is Unicom, which is basically the global CTAF or safety com frequency. So when nobody's online, everyone goes onto 122.8 on VATSIM. Right, so radio is on. Look out, radio for taxi clearance, and then we'll do a BRI check. So we'll quickly look around. Nobody here. We can see we are going to taxi to the left, and then we're going to go onto the runway there. Is there a windsock we can look at to see which? There we go. So yeah, the windsock is favouring runway 29, I believe. Runway 29. Okay, is there a holding point? Holding point name that we should use? Not that I can see. So at this point, over safety comm, we would then say Portimao traffic, Golf, Romeo, India, Charlie, Hotel, radio check 122.8, taxiing to holding point for runway 29, Portimao. Okay, so everybody knows that we are going to be taxiing to the holding point, and we'll do our power checks at the holding point, put our flaps down, set the actually that's one thing I haven't done, set the transponder to standby here, release the brakes. So we do a BRI check, so we'll let the aircraft roll forward, and then we push both brakes down, make sure it's a symmetrical stop, and then we check the rudder, or at least the rudder pedals. So we will do a right turn. As we're turning, sorry, left turn, as we're turning to the left, the DI is decreasing, the turn indicator is showing a left turn, and the numbers on the compass is decreasing as well, but the artificial horizon is staying steady. We'll just do a quick check of the right rudder pedal. That's all looking good, everything's increasing, and the turn coordinator is showing a turn. Things are looking good. So, very quiet on the ground here in Portimao. We've got the whole of the apron to ourselves. When you're taxiing an aircraft, if you look out, it should just look like you're walking relatively slowly, because you're in an elevated position. You won't be doing walking speed. You're not going to be doing 3 miles an hour walking. You'll be doing probably 8, 9, 10 knots, but it should just look like a very comfortable slow walking speed. If you're on if you do have painted taxi lines, in the left seat, the yellow line, or the lines, should go through your right knee, and if you're, at least this is what I was taught, should go through your right knee, and if you're in the right seat, then they should go through your left shoulder. I'm not sure why you use shoulders and knees, but that's just what I was taught. So we taxi to the holding point, and we are going to point our nose into the wind. So I'm just going to put the left brake on here and just rotate us around, but we need to make sure that we are just check that we've got a straight nose wheel, because we're about to do a power check. We're about to put quite a bit of load through that front wheel if it's not straight. So you can see it's just bobbing. There we go, it's straight there. Brakes on. Power check. Location, check that we're positioned in the wind, which we are. Clear all round. Taxiing and runway surface is checked. So you don't want to be looking through the propeller at a bunch of stones, because as soon as you do your power checks, you're going to just drag those stones through the propeller into the windscreen. Not good for the engine, not good for the windscreen, not good for the human people sat behind the windscreen potentially. So we're positioned in the wind. Parking brake, I'm just going to use my toe brakes for that. Before we do anything, so you may have noticed I've just increased the power to 1200 RPM. These aircraft engines do not like to be sat idle. If you're going to sit for any length of time, we recommend that you set it to 1200 RPM just to keep that engine motoring. Stops the spark plugs fouling. So before we do any power checks, we check our T's and P's are both in the green. If these were off the top of the scale, it would be very silly to start a power check and start increasing the power. Got loads of fuel, just check everything's fine. So magnetos is on both. RPM, we're going to increase the power to 1700. Look out the little window to the left and just make sure we're not rolling forward, so the brakes are holding. Obviously in a real aircraft it's very easy just to raise your head, not quite so simple in a flight simulator. So we're at 1700, RPMs are steady. We are going to so we would first of all check the carb heat, again not modelled, make sure that we don't have more than the 75 RPM drop. Set it back to cold. Magnetos, turn off the right system, so we're just running on the left. We don't want to see more than 125 RPM drop, so there it's only about 75, so that looks good. Back to both, make sure climb is back to 1700 RPM. Next we turn off the left system, just the right system, again just 50 RPM drop there, so that looks good. Suction, still in the green. Ammeter is charging, looks like we've got a slight positive rate on that ammeter. Again, we come back to the T's and P's. Naturally the temperature has risen a little bit, but it's all within the green, so all is good. Next we set the power to idle, so we're checking for an idle cutout, an ICO check. So with low power the engine isn't cutting out, that's fine, and then we set it back to 1200 because, as I mentioned, it doesn't like to sit at idle. So power checks. Now this is probably the most important checklist. I mean, they're all important obviously, but this one is this one is actually called the Vital Actions Checklist for a very good reason. These are the things that are going to stop you killing yourself on takeoff. So, we're going to make sure that the trim is set for takeoff. Throttle friction nut is finger tight, because you don't want to set the full throttle, and then if you're controlling the yoke with two hands, take your hand off the throttle, because you're dealing with a bit of turbulence after takeoff. You don't want that throttle to shake itself out. Mixture is on rich, checked. Magnetos, just check it on both, because we have been playing with that a little bit. Pitot heater is not required, we'll leave it off. Primer in and locked, that's not modelled. Fuel is still on, and the quantities are full, and we would have confirmed that they were full by looking into the wing earlier on, and we haven't left a trail of fuel as we've of leaking fuel as we've gone to the holding point. Flaps as required, we'll do 10 degrees of flaps. Instruments and gauges, just check that the DI is correct, so that's 255, 255. We've climbed a little bit, so we'll just set that back to 0. T's and P's still in the green, that's coming down a bit after our power check. T's and P's in the green, fuel, vacuum ammeter. Harnesses, so this is something that I've seen people get caught out on their skills test. You've got to turn to your examiner and you've got to check to make sure that they're belted in. What they will often do is they will remove their shoulder strap just to check that you have checked. And if it's off, you've got to say, hang on, put your seatbelt on, I'm not moving until you put it on. It's the law. Hatches and harnesses, check the carb heat is set to cold, check that we still have full and free movement of the flight controls, nothing has broken. You can see the aircraft, even with just a little bit of power, is moving around because of the airflow from the prop. Full and free movement. Transponder at this point goes to altitude, so it goes into mode C, which also reports your altitude to any air traffic controllers watching you. And we set our strobes to on. I don't think that's legally required when it's VFR day like that. To be honest, you can't really see your strobes, but we'll do it anyway. Next we do takeoff, so we need clearance. Make sure we're on the right runway, and then we'll take off. Okay, so I'm just going to make a turn. I'm going to move the aircraft forward a touch. As I say, expect this to be a horrible takeoff because I'm getting used to the sensitivities of this aircraft compared to the Daher Kodiak. Check the approach, nothing's coming down. Now before we move across this line here, we have to do a radio call. Portimao traffic, Golf Romeo India Charlie Hotel. Ready for departure, lining up runway 29, Portimao. Now we always still keep a lookout, because there are aircraft flying around today, remarkably, that still don't have radios in them, called NORDO traffic, no radio traffic. So we pull onto the runway. I'm going to do left-hand circuits because that takes us over the beach, over the sea. I just think that'll be a bit more visually interesting. And then we're going to come back here to runway 29. And we'll do a few touch and goes. Again, they will be bad. I'm sure they will. I'm just out of practice, but that's why I'm doing this. I'm doing this for practice in a far cheaper way than hiring a Cessna 150 for 100 and whatever quid an hour. Portimao traffic, Golf Charlie Hotel, rolling runway 29, Portimao. Let's go, go, go. Start pushing down a little bit on that right rudder pedal. Full power. Loads of right rudder. T's and P's are in the green. RPMs are stable. Airspeed is alive. Waiting for 60 knots. There's 60. Pull back. And we are in the air. So we want to get that ball balanced. Bottom left hand corner of the screen, you can see the turn coordinator. Keep it at 60 knots. 300 feet, we're going to bring the flaps up. Past 300. Now if we pull back on the controls, this is a lot more intuitive in the real aircraft. Now we're going to have to nose up a little bit more than we did with the flaps down because we've got less drag. I find that the aircraft settles into a nice straight and level flight profile. Oh, look at that, that looks lush. So we're going to turn to the left. Oh, still a warning horn. So we're going to wait for 290 to show in the compass. We can also look out of our window, see that we are not quite perpendicular. And then we're going to wait for 1,000 feet. There's 1,000 feet. Reduce the power to about 2100 just because we are quite light. Then we're going to try and trim. I'm going to try and trim. Just wind out all of the rudder that you've got on at this stage. So when you're flying in the cruise, the aircraft should be set up so that you don't need any rudder and you can just fly pretty much hands off. So 1,000 feet. Let's turn when we're over the beach. Let's just check. So we've got flaps up. We are descending a touch. We'll give the people in those hotels overlooking the beach something to video and put on Instagram. So we're going to do a rate 2 turn. So you want to keep see these little orange arrows at the 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 3 o'clock position. You can use these on your circuits. So you can see 290, so 10 degrees less than 300, should be in your in that 6 o'clock position, and that will mean that we are now parallel to the runway. I'm just going to climb a little bit. Again, trimming is much more of a natural process in the real aircraft than I find in the flight sim. I find this to be quite jittery. So just keeping 290 behind us. Just enjoy the scenery, look at those hotels and the pools. This is Autoortho, so it's all being streamed from Bing Maps. Just about make out the airport at the top left hand corner of your screen there. So we are, because we've come quite far away from the airport, not really in a traffic pattern. We are going to set up for landing on base leg rather than on downwind. So before we get to this harbour, we can turn just descending a touch back down to pattern altitude. So now we want to try, oh, I've overshot. We want to try and get 290 on that 9 o'clock position, that 9 o'clock orange arrow, which is about there. And at this point I'm going to start configuring for landing. So power to 1500. Let the airspeed bleed off. You get a lot of roll, I find, on this. We'll start off with 1 notch of flaps. So power, sorry, the speed is in the white arc, so let's actually do 2. Wait until we get to 60 knots. Keep that power at 1500. Descent rate is 500 feet per minute. There's the runway. So this is where you need to be very, very careful not to stall the aircraft. You haven't got much power, you haven't got a lot of height to trade for speed if you need it, so you don't want to be turning too sharply. Runway is just coming straight ahead. Can you see it at the top there? Just above the artificial horizon. Now we're going to do quite a long approach. So let's add a bit of power, because that runway is looking quite flat to me. We haven't got a lot of speed, so I want to make sure that we can get there. So we'll use our feet to try and stay straight. The wind was from slightly to the left of the runway, so we may need to put our nose slightly to the left to stay lined up. That's called a crabbing approach, or a crab approach. Portimao traffic, Golf Charlie Hotel, final runway 29, Portimao. Yeah, I find this really sensitive. Bring that power back. Keep that nose up, because I like to try and keep visual contact with the runway we're landing on. So you control your speed with your pitch, so keep that nose up, and we control our descent rate with power. Yeah, I can feel how rusty I am. A lot easier with a trim wheel as well, rather than being forced to use this. I usually have the propeller controls, the blue propeller control on the throttle quadrant set up for trim. A bit high, so just bring all the power off. Get that extra notch of flaps down. So we're at maximum flaps now. That's awful, that's awful, that's awful. Okay. Let's go around. Told you it'd be awful. So still 20 degrees of flaps. A foot above, go to 10 degrees, make sure we've got positive rate. Speed's increasing, so we can now pull the nose up a touch. Keep it at 60 knots. Don't make the stall warning horn go off. Above 300 feet, flaps up. So now the aircraft is able to climb and accelerate without the drag of the flaps. Look under our wing, make sure there's nothing hiding. And we'll turn left. The speed is very high. I should be using that speed and converting that speed into vertical speed. So I've captured 290 on the 3 o'clock orange arrow. There's 1,000 feet. That wasn't 290. That's 290 there. Need a bit more power for straight and level flight. I need to be very careful as well. Oh, you see I'm in a bit of a Dutch roll here. So a Dutch roll is basically where the aircraft sort of does that, so you counteract with the right turn, then you end up right turning, then you've got to do a left turn to counteract it, and you just end up doing this. It's, I don't find that's an issue in the Cessna in real life. As you can see, it's just sort of rolling by itself left and right. That doesn't happen in my experience, because the pendulum effect of having the weight of the aircraft under the high wing keeps you nicely straight and level. I said I wasn't going to come this far last time, but I've done exactly that. Come back inland a little bit, so we'll head to the east, and that's going to bring us, let's do it to 080. That's going to bring us back inland a little bit. Try and sort out this trim. How's that? Apart from the roll, which it still just rolls. I've never experienced a Cessna just rolling left and right. Where's the runway? That's in there, I think. That bit of tarmac there, and there's the hangars, yep. Portimao traffic, Golf Charlie Hotel, downwind runway 29, Portimao. I didn't make that downwind call before, very naughty. Okay, so if we now turn back onto proper downwind heading. Now this time it would be nice to actually get the wheels on the ground. See the runway there, so if we just make a nice left turn, make sure nothing is approaching straight in. Then we'll start configuring. So 1500, that looks like a better profile. Keep that nose up so the speed bleeds off, and we can start lowering the flaps. So the speed at the top left hand corner, you can see the needle, that needs to be in the white arc. I'm just waiting for that, and you can't operate the flaps outside of that white arc. So straight into two notches of flaps, 20 degrees of flaps. Let that speed bleed off. Keep that nose up. There's 60. Get that power back on just a little bit. Not too much, I would say that's quite a good profile. We are to the right of the centre line, so let's get back on profile. Now your touchdown zone shouldn't be moving up or down in your windscreen. I don't know why, but I find this so much easier. For real. So if you think about the runway as a pendulum, I know I've called the aircraft a pendulum already. So I'm not happy with our height there. So if you think the closest point of the runway as being the bottom of the pendulum. If the bottom of the pendulum, you've got to basically chase the bottom of the pendulum. So if the bottom of the pendulum is moving to the right, go to the right. Okay, so I think we've made that. hold it off. Not my best, not my worst. Go around. I'm using about 75% right rudder there. That is not realistic, especially with the wind from the left. No, even with the wind from the left. 100 feet climbing, speeds above 60, 10 degrees of flaps. Keep that nose up. See, you get roll when you raise the flaps on X-plane as well. That just doesn't happen. Because it's symmetrical. So you're not changing the difference between the left and the right wing lift. .300 feet, flaps up. This is starting to make a bit more sense muscle memory wise. Okay, I'm going to have to pause this here and change the, to get rid of that for a moment, joystick. So if we change this from the prop to elevator trim, and then I think if we use the cubic, that's best. Let's give that a go. So unpause. Not supposed to do that when you're on VATSIM, but needs must. Right, now when I move this, it's going to put me in an out of trim situation, so there we go. So you can see now the wheel is now moving because when I move the prop lever on the throttle quadrant. So that should, oh, nope, it's reversed, so we need to reverse that. Elevator trim, don't reverse the axis, hit done, unpause. So now when we pull back on the prop, it makes it go up, and when we push forward it makes it go down. Yes, that's exactly what we want. Okay, so a little bit out of position. Flaps roll up. Got loads of speed, far too much speed. So just climb, get rid of some of that speed. Get to 1,000 feet. Now this time we aren't going to, so now if I just use this, that's much nicer. Much easier to trim when you've got an analog control rather than just using the electric trim. Okay, so 1,000 feet, no, we're descending. I'm going to make a left hand turn here and sort it out on downwind. There's a train. There's the runway there, which means that we've come into the pattern too much. Turn until we get a 290 at the bottom of the DI. So compass says 12, DI says 12. Still a little bit low. At least now we can see the runway. That's better. This is a better circuit. If the engine quit now, we could probably descend. In fact, should we do that? That's a good test, which you have to do on your skills test as well. So, Portimao traffic, Golf Charlie Hotel, downwind runway 29er, Portimao. So when you rebeam the numbers, which is about there, what can happen is your examiner will go, boosh, you've lost an engine, what do you do? First thing you do is you turn towards the airport. Lift the nose up because you want your best speed, best glide, and then once you're at 60 knots, you've then got options. So then we want to turn towards the airport. So I'm not at best rate of glide, which means I'm actually wasting energy here. No flaps. I think I might have left that turn a little bit too late. Always turn straight towards the airport. Don't mess about with trying to do a square base leg, because you're not going to do a proper powered approach profile. We are going to run out of energy here, are we? Heart in mouth. Completely flapless all the way down because I couldn't. So it's me just resetting the trim. I couldn't risk adding any drag to the airframe there whatsoever. Whew. So yeah, you would have survived that. It was a bit unnerving watching some of the houses pass by out the left hand side of the cockpit window, but we got there. That is something that you get tested on before you get your private pilot license. So we're going to make a turn. Normally again you just look left, look under the wing, make sure nothing's there. So turn on to 290, 290 on that right hand side orange arrow, continue the climb. Okay, so I'm going to stop at the next good normal landing. Cruise power set, trim. So you do a pat, power, attitude, trim. So you do an attitude, power, trim, APT at the top of a climb. And you do a power, attitude, trim at all of the climbs and descends. There's the runway. Is that the runway? Yes, that's the runway. A couple of things I'm struggling with here. So there's a picture out the front that when you're flying visually, visual flight rules, and there's a visual pilot, which is what the PPL, private pilot license, is. You get like a view out the window, and that's what you try and maintain. And that is, for me, at my height, is 1/3 ground, 2/3 sky. I'm struggling here because I need to keep the nose up a lot more than that, so it's only 1/6 ground, 5/6 sky, which is not what I'm used to. So the runway is to our left 45 degrees, so we make a turn. Keep that nose up. We don't really want to be descending until you're in the flap range. Knock down 2 notches of flaps. Try and catch that nose. I think the nose goes up too violently on X-plane as well. Make sure nothing's joining straight in. Keep the power at 1500. There's the runway. Get that trim to 60. RPM, trimmed for 60 knots. And really the plane should fly itself down the approach now. Did I put flaps down? Yes I did. I always do that. I always turn too early onto final. Portimao traffic, Golf Charlie Hotel, final runway 29er, Portimao. So you just want tiny little corrections really at this stage. Not what I'm doing, that's what you should be doing at this stage. Tiny little corrections. Use your feet to stay straight. Try not to hit houses on the approach. Bit low, bit low, bit low. Use power to get back onto profile. Yeah, this is rubbish. Absolutely rubbish. Bit more power to get the runway. Nice soft landing, but apart from that, absolutely rubbish. So when you're rolling, you can knock 10 degrees of flaps up. 60, back into the air. Things are starting slowly to come back to me. Let's try and stay on a good heading, so 290. See if I try and balance, if I get the ball balanced. Gotta counteract a lot of roll. There's 300 feet, flaps up, pull the nose up a little bit, because we now have less drag, so she'll climb easier at 60. I'm using my electric trim again. There's 500, look out the window, look under your wing, check there's nothing hiding, and then put in a boot of rudder. And this is saying we need opposite rudder, which is interesting. This is not a masterclass in flying Cessna. If you want one of those, please check out Aviation 101, but this is not Aviation 101. Cruise power. Turn onto downwind. Yeah, I think this is so wobbly now compared to what it was a few versions ago. Is there a setting for that? I'm sure there's something where you can change the number of cycles. Ooh, that's rich presence. Discord. Output. Translated. No, I don't really want to stay paused when I'm flying on VATSIM for very long. There's the runway. Portimao traffic, Golf Charlie Hotel, downwind runway 29er, Portimao. The other thing as well that I haven't been doing is my downwind checks. So we need to do brakes, undercarriage, mixtures rich, fuel for a go around, instruments, so we check the DI, so that's 110, 110, T's and P's, ammeter, vacuum, that's all correct. Landing lights not required, VFR day, carb heat not modelled, hatches and harnesses, everyone's strapped in. Let's try this again. So 1500 RPM. Keep that nose up. Descending too much. Keep that nose up. 2 notches of flaps. going to keep the power just a bit more because we've been running out of energy sooner than expected. So we need to learn from that mistake. Pitch for... So if I let go now, we are pitched for about 65, that'll do. So I'm pretty sure it was a 70 knot approach speed in the 172 that I flew, so that works. Bit of a steep turn. Okay, so we need to turn left just a touch, bit of rudder. Try and... Why are we going so quickly now? Get that nose up a bit more. Keep that power where it is. Try and keep the wings level and just dance on the rudder pedals. That was good. Okay, happy with that. Not happy with the centre line. Portimao traffic, Golf Charlie Hotel, backtracking runway 29. Didn't do a final call. Again, all these things, I don't know why, they're just so much more obvious when you're turning final in real life. But again, it also comes down to muscle memory. Okay, so I mean the aircraft will be used again. It sounds like a low bar, but honestly, it's general aviation. That's all we can hope for. I think I'm going to go spend a bit of time trying to figure out how to desensitize these controls, because it's very uncomfortable to use this at its current sensitivity levels. So once we have left the runway, before parking up, so you immediately go to the nearest holding point after landing. We're going to turn into the wind again, which was coming from around about west, maybe a little bit to the left of west. There. Brakes on, and then we do the after landing checklist. After landing check, carburetor heat cold, or what do you do when you've parked up? Say power to 1200 RPM. After landing, carb heat, cold, flaps, up, throttle friction nut loose, not modelled, radio, nav aids, electrics, non-essentials off, so turn the strobes off, set the transponder to standby, trim, set neutral, so I can now use my, that's really nice to have, my analog trim back to takeoff. And then next we will do the shutdown checklist. Okay, check nothing's coming this way. Then we'll go and park up where we started. do there. Okay, shutdown checklist. Location, not obstructing, into the wind, nose wheel straight. Correct. Parking brake. Currently my feet, so we'll put the parking brake on for realsies. Magnetos, check for dead cut, and that's just out of courtesy. I've done it again, 1200 when we're idling. Check for dead cut. Turn off the right system, back to both. Turn off the left system, back to both. Radio nav aids off, so we turn off the transponder, turn off the radios, close the throttle, and then set the mixture to fully lean. That deprives the engine of any fuel. After engine stops, magnetos to off, electrics off, so turn off the beacon, master switch off, fuel cock, we'll leave it where it is, control lock in. We don't normally do that at the flight school because there's normally another lesson afterwards. Control lock, hatches, harnesses, security. So, there we go. Let's jump out. Yep, airplane looks like an airplane still. Both wings are still attached. Landing gear still attached. I would say, as far as learning goes, that was a successful flight. So thank you very much for watching me again clot around in a, ooh, that's nice, good scenery. So I'm just, ignore me, I'm just enjoying the injected, building's a bit close to the road. Yeah, I'm just enjoying the injected satellite scenery. This is quite cool. Very nice. Well, thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you again soon. And yeah, all the best. Fly safe. Oh no, I can't say that. That's Scott Manley's saying. Fly well? Might need to work on that. Thanks everyone.